Okay, being 3 o'clock, I'll call the Marathon County Executive Committee to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we have next on the agenda is public comment. No one has approached me, and I don't believe anybody's approached the clerk to address the committee. So we'll move on to approval of the executive committee meeting minutes, June 9th, 2022. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Mask. Is there any discussion on the minutes as presented? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the meeting minutes of June 9th, 2022 as presented in the packet signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to education presentation and committee discussion, and we will start out with the thing that only has usually about one or two things on, and that is the administrator's annual work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the document is in your packet, everyone, so I won't go through everything in detail, but the chair asked that I provide just a couple of key highlights, and if at any point anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt. But the document, it is in your packet. I attempted to capture the progress that we've made on the work plan to this point. You can see in the title I indicated updated 7/13 of 2022. Just go through a couple of things that I think again, our highlights. With respect to our facilities-related projects, just yesterday, the thing I'll add with respect to item 1A, the HR Finance and Property Committee did approve for consideration by the full board the review of the funding request based on construction overages for the North Central Healthcare Campus project. So that will be coming to the board shortly. Similarly, with respect to item B, 1B. One thing I think you'll hear more about as staff continue to work toward a master facilities plan, and it's something I'm very proud of, quite honestly. You'll see on the second page, the renovated space that our social services department is going to be occupying on the North Central Healthcare Campus is less than 70% of the size of the current space that they operate out of on Thomas Street. Approximately 10,000 fewer square feet. That did not happen by chance. That was a clear directive from administration and facilities and to social services, really to kind of try to design that space with a hybrid workspace design or more remote work, really driving that. And quite honestly, our timing was quite good. We had that on the social services directors. I had asked her to put that on her annual work plan, and I believe it's 2019, so we were actually thinking about it before the pandemic, and we had also the opportunity to learn perhaps how to do that better as the pandemic continued. So that a very strong development. Moving forward, the West Side Master Plan is moving well. There was a presentation to the Infrastructure Committee on progress. I put a link into the YouTube presentation there. So that project, again, going well to this point. I'll jump a little bit ahead to page 4, again with a timely update that actually I did not get into this document because it just, again, occurred yesterday. The Regional Forensic Science Center, we've had a fair amount of progress on that as of late through the diligent efforts of the chair of the task force, Chair McEwen. Had conversations with DHS regarding potential support, as well as I referenced, conversations with NTC that have gone extremely well. Also the Department of Justice. We have local representatives at the state and federal level that are attempting to seek out funding on our behalf. But just yesterday, the HR Finance and Property Committee did likewise agree to recommend to the board to encumber $2 million, as was the request from the morgue task force and which was approved by public safety to move forward, but encumber $2 million of ARPA funding for that project should the remaining funding sources be procured. And again, currently we're looking at about a $10 million project for the construction of that building. Our partnership conversations with NTC, again, have gone quite well. They've agreed to provide an in-kind donation relative to the land upon which to construct that building, as well as some operational roles that they would assist us with. So that was quite a positive development. With respect to item 3A, probably really in my mind, one of the, if not the top project we have going on, certainly in the top several, is our Workday implementation. Again, that's the replacement of our 28-year-old financial system, as well as the implementation of our first consolidated HR system. Going well, on time. We are just beginning to move into the tenant testing stage. And again, go live is really looking at that end of this year into the first quarter of next year. The one thing I think the board will have the opportunity to assist significantly in terms of what really are the next steps is really looking at item C on page 6. The administration, Office of Administration, at the request of the board, did apply for community development block grant dollars that were associated with the coronavirus pandemic some time ago, and we were fortunate enough to have that grant approved for $1.1 million. Essentially, it was broken up between $500,000 for assistance for individuals that were impacted in terms of rent or housing, and then another $500,000 for individuals, small business owners that were impacted by the pandemic. And these funds, based on the nature of the grant and the community development block grant area, they are for businesses and individuals that are outside of the Wausau metropolitan area, because Wausau is a direct funding community through the community development block grant. But we've had a fair amount of funds that have been allocated for business assistance, small business assistance, and we have a couple more that are kind of in the pipeline. But as of right now, we're in that about $150,000 of the $500 has been deployed for small business assistance, far less for housing and rental assistance, only $12,000. So the question, should the board wish to kind of look at whether or not this is first possible, I haven't investigated this as of yet, but look at whether or not we have the ability to seek the opportunity to shift some of that funding on the housing and rental side to the small business side, and even if that is really necessary, because again, they've only been able to deploy about $150,000. But administration has sought some additional information at this point, and I will certainly keep the board apprised. But I think that's an opportunity for some engagement, perhaps with the Extension Education Economic Development Committee and other committees of the board as it sees fit. Moving forward, hitting another larger project, I think something that is really important for us long-term is on page 7. The last item on that page, item F. Just the most important piece of that is recently, in July, in fact, the Infrastructure Committee received that summary presentation from staff relative to our 2050 Transportation Funding Sustainability Plan on a couple of key pieces. First, the financial implications of that report from North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning, as well as an overview of the PACER roadway rating system. And we will have a presentation, staff have arranged for a presentation in August from Tim Ramberg, who is generally referred to as the GTA guru in the state of Wisconsin, knows a great deal about the general transportation aid system. But the short story there is, even in the very near term, we have a gap between the funding that we have historically allocated for highway projects and the costs, the projected costs of those projects in light of the service levels that the board has traditionally desired to move forward. On the next page, item 8G, Just wanted to highlight, relative to parks, I have had a couple of meetings, and for those of you that do attend Wisconsin Counties Association events or have followed closely the emails that come from the Counties Association, and particularly the County Forest Association, there has been discussion about the carbon credit market. And Marathon County does have, as you know, relatively significant amount of county forest. We certainly aren't near the top in the state. I believe Bayfield County has in excess of 150,000 acres. But Bayfield, for example, has enrolled in this carbon credit market, a portion of its forests. Other counties have done the same. It's a potential for us that, while we don't have solid revenue projections, what that may be, they may be significant, but that's a policy question for the board, ultimately whether or not you want to participate in that market. And I just met recently with staff trying to sit down and understand that market, gather additional information, and then we'll work with board leadership, the Forestry Recreation Committee, and certainly the Environmental Resources Committee to determine what those next steps in terms of board engagement look like. Similarly, I wanted to highlight on page 9, item 3K. As many of you that are on the board, have been on the board for a number of terms, or those of you that are on the solid waste board know, we do have a solid waste department. And our department there does manage that landfill, and one of the byproducts of managing a landfill is landfill gas. And Marathon County has had a long-standing agreement with a third party that leases a portion of property within our landfill, and on that portion of property, they convert landfill gas they have historically converted landfill gas to electricity. There is a nationwide development to look at different operations there to convert landfill gas to renewable natural gas. That too has the potential for significant revenues for entities that are engaged in that. I should say significant potential revenue streams for entities engaged in that work. And a number of counties have directly engaged in that. However, again, we have already an agreement with a third party that has the rights to that landfill gas for use, and currently, historically, they have used that for electrical generation. We've been engaged with discussions with another series of entities about the potential of interest in their purchasing that third party that I referred to. And most recently, we have had some pretty good conversations. Again, this is really, the county's not directly involved in that potential purchase. We have a contract with a lease agreement with that third party that's currently existing on site, where we have a right of first refusal for a traditional purchase of that entity. It's unclear whether or not that right of first refusal would in fact be triggered in this case, but regardless of all those factors, we may be coming to the board, and it would again start with the solid waste board, and we'd have discussions about what that potentially might look like. But a very significant development that at least very recently has dominated a significant amount of Corporation Counsel Purner's time, administration time, and certainly solid waste staff time. Item 4A, some criminal justice initiatives, the CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, I think has worked very well since the board adopted formally adopted the ordinance. The one thing I wanted to highlight there is utilizing our system budgeting approach that we piloted last year, really getting the criminal justice system entities together, the departments together, and talking about what their primary needs are. For those of you that were at public safety earlier this week, again, there was discussion in reference to data. The top need that came out of those discussions, those system budgeting discussions, was again the idea of a data analyst or data officer position. So administration has been working to determine potential funding streams for that data officer position. We have a tentative position description that is virtually complete, but want to make sure I really think it's meeting our needs, and that is one thing you will likely see in the proposed 2023 budget. Other pieces, on page 11, the Public Safety Committee just discussed this again, the idea of emergency medical services and what that might look like on a county-wide system. At this point, it is looking like we will at least do some generation work on a potential request for proposals for a consultant to take a look at that. Similarly, projects that were ongoing right now are reevaluation of our healthcare insurance delivery methodology. For those of you that have been on the board before, you read the budget document, you'll certainly appreciate we are and have been for a number of years fully insured through the Group Health Trust through Wisconsin, associated with the Wisconsin Counties Association. We've been evaluating opportunities to potentially control those costs and doing that through being self-funded. So we will, through our annual budget process, certainly keep the board apprised of what potentials we have in that realm. But I think those were the things I wanted to briefly highlight, and certainly if there are any questions on any information within the document, happy to take those at this time. I know there are a number of projects within the document and a fair amount of information to digest, but if at any point anyone has any questions, certainly can take them today or in the future.
Questions for the administrator on the update on the administrator's work plan? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in our discussions with comprehensive plan, strategic plan, Lance has spoken often that the work plan that he just spoke of comes from those documents, that the work we do in the county and the work plan comes from those. So do we have any association with these items to our actual objectives? Is there a column or something that would indicate where they come from?
No, not on this document, clearly. I could work to do that. I know, I believe in it might have been 2016 or certainly several years ago, there was a reference to strategic plan objectives, but the last several years there has not been. My approach, quite honestly, in generating a lot of these is I listen to the discussion at the committees and I try to make sure that every big thing you talk about, I get on here for you to get some updates on where the work that we're doing, and then I pick the big internal operations projects that are happening. But I certainly can look at, if that's something the committee would like me to do, to try to reference the various strategic plan objectives. The only one there is a reference in this document to the comprehensive and strategic plan updates.
So in the
nothing
past,
specific.
I think they were actually categorized by strategic plan initiative instead of now whether it's facilities or whether so that's the change. But previously, we did have it identified by strategic plan. So I think there's an opportunity to potentially identify how they tie back to the strategic plan or the comprehensive plan with a simple column.
And I would just kind of follow up with a comment on that certainly the past couple of years show that a lot of the work that's done isn't in the work plan, isn't in our strategic plan. You know, we're making adjustments in both documents. The comp plan and strategic plan indicate that. I just think it would be helpful to the committee and also to the full board if we could have that identification so we can get a clear view of that. The second thought would be what objectives in the work plan are statutorial. I think that's something just that I'll bring up later in the grant. And the big scope is, you know, what are required things that we need to do, again, tying back to the strategic plan. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I'll go back to your first point, and I hope I hit your second. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of work in the work plan that perhaps doesn't flow directly from the strategic or comprehensive plan. And I'll also say there's a lot of work that I do every day that isn't in here. I mean, there's not a just keep the wheels on the bus and, you know, run an organization of 750 people, recruiting and all those things, doing performance appraisals for department heads. That's not in here either. I tried to actually accomplish a little bit more of that in this year's work plan than has been historically included. And you'll see that on the last items, I believe it's items that are coded as number 7, because there's a fair amount of work that is required from the administrator relative to other entities based on the agreements and rules that the county board has adopted. So, for example, your most recent draft of the North Central Healthcare Tri-County Partnership, it is required that the administrator or their designee participate on the executive committee. Similarly, with respect to CCIT, the City County Information Technology Commission, my involvement in that is specified by intergovernmental agreement, and in fact, I was recently elected chair of that. Again, I think that happened last year too. But I tried to do more of that, but to your point, Supervisor Dickinson, it's the document, there are certainly opportunities to improve that document. And if looking at statutorily mandated things is something that the board wants, I don't know if that's best done through this document, but we can put together a presentation on what programs or services are statutorily mandated, and we can have things, and try to give you some additional information as it relates to things like child protection is statutorily mandated, as are the provision of county highways, but level of service also is inherent in that statutory mandate. We don't need to provide a paved roadway into every township that is large. It's limited, and solid waste department is on this document for reference. We are not statutorily obligated, to have a solid waste department. So I can try to, would that be helpful? If there is consensus, I can.
I think the other thing that is critical is the work plan also identifies the work that is required in some cases to, one, just run an operation of 750 employees with 26 different departments, but it's also the keeping the operation running. When you have, so it's not specific, and I'll give you a prime example. Is the strategic plan say that we need to create a new infrastructure facility? No, but I think it says look at potential possibilities of joint entities working together and the only way that that's going to be accomplished is if we have a joint facility for infrastructure, potentially adding to that the Sheriff's Department maintenance, adding to that potentially CPZ, Forestry Department, Parks and Rec, all under one facility. So it's a joint, facility and joint utilization of some of the equipment. But is it identified as a project on the work plan? Yes. But is it spelled out specifically in the strategic plan? I would say no. Supervisor Boots.
Those are already available to
That's already available to the board through the priority-based budgeting. We have everything that is statutorily required already.
Yeah, we can run a report out of that.
Other questions for the administrator on the work plan? Supervisor Dickinson.
Just one more, and that is, when do you remove items off of your work plan? Do you retain them for a year or 2 years? When you see some of these items that are in the red, that there's no movement or something, when do you decide that that's pulled? Or is that the county giving direction through a committee? Or
It's the latter.
I would say that it is imperative upon this committee and or the full board taking action to remove something and saying that's no longer relevant. We don't want to go down that direction, and we're therefore directing the administration to remove it from the plan. Until we do that, it stays on there. I mean, that's what we are entitled. That's what we are doing, is we are supposed to direct administration.
If I can just add, that's been my practice. I would welcome if there were things on that work plan that this committee and the full board wants removed. I'll be very blunt. There's too much. I mean, this is like a 5-year work plan. And some of the things, to your point, when do they come off? I mean, the facilities-related project number 1A, continue renovation of North Central Healthcare spaces, and that's been on the work plan because we've been working on it since 2018. I mean, it's a 5-year construction project. Otherwise, I do take them off once I deem them complete in the board. I get the sense that the board deems them complete. And I do have one project on there that I will leave on for the rest of the year, but in my mind, it's complete enough, unless you tell me that it's not, and I should have highlighted that one. I will find it quickly.
There it is.
It is on page 13, the development and implementation of a procurement code training for department heads and develop procurement code oversight processes. That was based on comments at the HR Finance and Property Committee and the full board relative to the adoption of a revised procurement code at the end of last year. Again, for those of you that have been on the board for a while, you'll know that procurement code was, I think it was older than I am, or pretty close, maybe not quite that old. But it was in dire need of update. We did, as staff, working with Corporation Counsel and a couple other key players, did update that, and it was brought to the board and formally adopted at the end of last year. We did deliver trainings to existing department heads. We also delivered specific trainings on, as referenced in the progress side, the progress column on the far right, on some of the challenges that we've seen with capital leases. That's where sometimes people don't understand the procurement implications of leasing. That is something you need to move through in a procurement fashion. It does impact our bonding capacity and our disclosure requirements under our bonding rules. And my plan is to incorporate the trainings into our Workday ERP when that is implemented fully in 2023. So in my mind, it's complete until that point. I will leave it on. If the board wants additional reports back on that process, happy to give them. But in my mind, that's as complete as it's going to get until I put the videos together and make Mike stand in front of a camera and talk about procurement, so that every time I have a new department head come in, they can watch the video and I have a record that they completed the training.
So just for clarification, if I will, because
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair, you had mentioned that the work plan, I just want to clarify, is the work plan that Lance puts together our responsibility? It does, because I just want to clarify, you kind of alluded to that, and I think the comp plan and the strat plan are, but the work, because there's things in the work plan that aren't in those, so I just want to be clear on.
Correct. The work plan is still ultimately the full board's responsibility and each of the committees, but it comes to the executive committee for review, because it's one of the items that we use for administration's review and our responsibility of reviewing the success of the administrator as our sole employee and direct report. Any other discussion? Any other questions to the
If I can add
administrator?
one thing,
Go
it's
ahead.
in your board rules that I have to deliver an annual work plan, an annual plan of work to the county board annually, every year, and you have to formally adopt it. So it's set forth in your rules, and it's again, the way I've approached it is, here it is, section 2.01. Rules 2.01 sub 7. No, that's not right. It's highlighting the wrong word, work plan. But it is in your rules that I have to present it on by certain dates, and it has to be formally adopted by the board. On occasion, the board has taken longer to ruminate about what should be on the plan than was in your rule, but I present it to you within those obligations of your rules.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to next item on the, and the administrator will give a brief report on the effects of the increased fuel costs on department budgets. And you have in your document, in your packet, there's a document, and the administrator will go through that document.
Sure. And I will be more brief here. So I know there were questions, and I think they're very good questions about what is the impact of fuel, and I just wanted to allay some of the concerns. We have been monitoring that. I mean, quite honestly, that's one of the things when the chair referred to, running the organization, ensuring that we are reacting to the changing environment in terms of operations is one of those things that administration, finance, and your internal departments attempt to ensure at all times. So I put together this document, and essentially as part of my mid-year check-in with every department, and with finance, I tried to classify each department into, from the far left, which is virtually no impact, to the far right, which is significant impact, and in fact, they foresee needing to request contingency funds or some other outside of their department funding to address that shortfall. And you'll see the vast majority of our departments fall into columns 1, or some departments indicated they fall into column 2, and I left them in column 2 even though I think they perhaps could be in column 1. And let me tell you a little bit about why I think that. The vast majority of our departments are really impacted more by the IRS mileage reimbursement increase than fuel. And why that is because most of our departments don't have fuel line items. They have training and mileage reimbursement line items for when staff are traveling in connection with their work. So as all of you know, the IRS mileage rate increased in 2022 by 4 cents to 62.5 cents. So just shy of a 7% increase from 2021. So the departments that you'll see that are more in column number 3, which is significant impact, but we don't anticipate requiring outside resources to stay within budget, are really those departments that actually have a fuel line item. And you'll see sheriff's, solid waste, highway are the primary ones. The other one that I would say is somewhat similar certainly would be Central Wisconsin Airport and Parks, Rec and Forestry, but for various reasons they are in column 2. But you look at the difference between the increase in IRS mileage, that less than 7% that I talked about from 21 to 22. You look at the market price for fuel in June of 2021, nationwide average, so I know it's not entirely specifically applicable here, but I think it's illustrative. In June of 2021, average nationwide blended rate was $3.17 a gallon. This June, $5.03. So you're looking at an increase of $1.86, which is 59%. So you'll see those departments that have a fuel line item, they're fundamentally different than those departments that are really more on the training and mileage reimbursement in that position. That said, as I indicated and as the summary shows, we really have, in my mind, we are in a pretty strong position budgetarily to address this significant market increase, and I'll hit on a couple of reasons why that is. First, with respect to the sheriff's office, one of the things I put in column number 3 is, are you doing things operationally to control that cost? And I tried to highlight in my summary for the sheriff's office that there is a strategy and a plan in place to transfer funds from some personnel vacancies as opposed to making operational changes. And the reason for that is operational changes from the sheriff's office are things like, rather than actively patrol, you park and you turn your vehicle off, or some things you've perhaps seen in the past from various law enforcement agencies. And the sheriff's office, to their credit, strives not to do those things. They want to continue to provide a high quality service. We do have that strategy based on vacancies where we are, at this point, confident that we will be able to manage that internally within the budget. We also have the opportunity to deploy some other funding streams, grant funding streams, to cover fuel costs. Solid waste, again, similar impact. They operate a wide variety of heavy equipment, so fuel is a big piece, and I believe Melissa talked about this at the solid waste department. Sure, if you want to.
If I may, yes, we did, and right now we're not considering a fuel surcharge because it can be kind of touchy, but we will be decreasing hours. We eventually will be closing at 3:30 instead of 4, and we're trying to avoid, by saving money on overtime. Come in on Saturday mornings, and that would be bad customer service, so we're going to do the 3:30 thing. We have some kind of tires, they have to be pulled out because they get stuck. We're considering starting to charge these chronic people, and the ones that have the belts that unload stuff, and they can't, their belts aren't working, because it's still the same ones, and we have to unload it manually, and it's taking more time with our equipment. We are considering a charge for them too, and then no idling. None of our equipment will be idling after a certain amount of minutes, because idling takes up a lot of fuel. So their changes are in place, and it's a moving target, because we'll see how this works, just decreasing hours and a few other things. But Melissa's on top of it, and we discussed this at length on Monday, and, well, you know she's always on top of that.
Perfect example of the operational things and the conversations we have as staff to make sure we're managing the budget.
Right, and Dave Hagenbusher, our operations manager, he's going to be the one that'll judge who's going to be the chronic offender, and so it's gonna be on him, I think, to decide who's going to be charged.
So perfect example, and thank you for that additional information. Highway Department, again, significant impact. They may end up over budget. They are protected more so than you might expect, because they purchase fuel in bulk through RFP every other year. So, you know, we're able to lock in a fuel rate that I think you or I would be very happy to lock in. So that budget impact is lessened in that regard. And they also have highway, highway general reserve funds within highway that if we do need to make those modifications, we'll discuss that and bring that to the appropriate committees. The last one I wanted to hit on, the last two, I referred to these before. Central Wisconsin Airport, again, much like solid waste, they operate, for lack of a better term, as an enterprise fund. There's not tax levy into operations. They have strategies in place to address fuel costs, and in fact, they've adopted a fleet replacement schedule and process that has ensured that they do replace those vehicles more quickly, taking advantage, I'll be very quick here, but taking advantage of the government discounts for purchasing new vehicles, and then waiting until the optimal time within that first 5 years to sell those vehicles. So you're getting a new vehicle, selling it for a higher rate than if you would keep it until the end of its useful life, which has allowed us to upgrade that fleet with more fuel-efficient vehicles. And then the last one is Parks, Rec and Forestry, and the only thing I'll indicate there is, as I referenced, their fuel costs, similar to highway, are mitigated by their procurement process relative to fuel, using the City of Wausau Department of Public Works, which they work closely with. So overall, the message I wanted to leave you with, and because I have heard some expressed concerns, staff are, as Supervisor Mask referenced, you know, this is something we look at frequently, our budgets and how are we performing. And I think at this point, they're on top of it. If things change, as they certainly do in this environment, I will certainly keep you apprised.
Any questions from the administrator on the report? And as you've seen in the last 30 days, the fuel price has started to go down, and so hopefully that trend continues. Moving on to operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution. Whoops, excuse me, I missed one. Item C, progress report on from the vice chair on standing committee's work on updating the strategic plan. Mr. McEwen, Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. We have been working with, I've been working with all the standing committees since our last executive meeting in June, where there was a consensus to update the strategic plan. I've met with all the standing committees except for HR Finance, which is actually not a lead committee for any of the 12 objectives, but is a support committee for 3 of them. But I plan on meeting with HR Finance and Property on July 26th, early. But anyways, it's a special day for somebody. But moving on, after the executive committee, I've been facilitating a discussion with each of the standing committees on the objectives that they are lead committees for. And also with helping updating this is the information that Administrator Leonard sent out with the current updates on each of the objectives, the strategies and outcome measures. There were 3 questions that were asked of each of the standing committees. Were there any new strategies to be added to the existing objectives in the plan? Should any of the strategies be prioritized? And should any strategies or objectives from the 2016 comp plan be added to this strategic plan? Number 2, as far as prioritizing any of the existing objectives, there really wasn't any desire or questions or concerns about doing that, but the other 2 were considered. An example, Infrastructure Committee, at our last meeting, we were able to complete our recommendations on 8.7 and 10.12, which the infrastructure is a lead committee on. However, it's in draft form, and we're going to review that. Infrastructure is going to review that at our next meeting as far as the updates, which would be recommendations to bring to the executive committee. The other committees will continue to work on their objectives, strategies, and outcome measures at their August meeting, with the exception of ERC. I did talk to the chair of ERC, and they have a very, very long agenda, so we're going to move that one off to the next meeting. But in most part, I hope to be able to start wrapping up these recommendations from each of the standing committees and bring recommendations to the executive committee in September, hopefully, because what I've heard from a lot of especially the new supervisors, these are all new objectives. All of them are, the strategies and everything. So I want to get recommendations to bring to this committee and to the full board, because this is going to be this board's strategic plan. So that's basically all I have done since our last meeting. I don't know if there's any questions from any of the chairs on the committees that I met with, but for the most part, I think it's moving forward very well as far as looking at the strategies, looking at the objectives. There were some recommendations from public safety on possibly 2 of the other strategies that are in 7.1 possibly be moved forward into the strategic plan. And like I said, that's what we're looking for, because in 2018, when this plan was adopted, a lot of things have changed, a lot of priorities have changed. And those should be the priorities that this board wants to look at and review. So are there any questions, comments?
Any questions for the vice chair on the update on the strategic plan? Again, the committees continue to do their work. They will continue to do their work. At some point, their recommendations will come to this committee, but at this point, it is not yet ready. Each of those committees, like I said, have not finalized all of their updates. Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, being in our infrastructure committee meeting, I was the vice chair of that, and then actually watching some of the other committee meetings and their discussion. I just want to point out that before our meeting, I had actually emailed Supervisor McEwen about a question that I had about this plan, and my question was, can we remove objectives? And that has come up in several of the meetings, and I think it's important for us as an executive committee to be clear with our other committees and with the entire board that yes, in fact, we can remove items. We can remove not only outcome measures and strategies, but also objectives. And I just think that's very important, because I think there is some confusion about what it means to update and extend. And I think it's creating some tension as how to move forward. So, a couple of the couple of the notes, like in the strategic plan, it clearly mentions the plan is meant to assist us in those efforts, the efforts of the plan. However, we recognize that over the life of the plan, circumstances can and most certainly will change. So too will our plan to ensure that it continues to offer elected officials and county employees the necessary information to do their work. There's a figure 1 in the strategic plan, and I think it's important, kind of has colored blocks, and then they come down from the comp plan all the way down to the work that's being done. And 2 of those, one is in blue and the other is in green. And one of them indicates the board should be working on updating the plan every 1 to 2 years. Secondly, the strategic plan as written, it's about the mission and vision of the county, and not every item is going to come up. But I think the spirit of the plan is that we are paying attention to it, not just every 5 years, but looking at the work plan, right, the annual work plan, which we have authority over, and then looking at that strategic plan to see what can we change if need be. It doesn't mean we're going to change everything. In that regard, I think the strategic plan with 12 objectives and all of those strategies is rather cumbersome to do that every 1 or 2 years. That it kind of gets away from, I think it can seem a little too detailed and too in-depth, just as a thought. So really that was looking for that clarification and making sure that we understand we have that requirement to update it. And I would say when we talk about the extension, I think there needs to be a clarification about what that means. We have not addressed the plan in the past couple of years. Now we say because of the issues that came up, but that's kind of a little bit of an excuse in the sense that, and I'm not putting it on the administrator or anyone, it's really on us, that we kind of got off focus of doing this work to assist the administrator in getting stuff done. So I would hate to see us extend it 2 years and say, we're not going to do this work until the end of 2024. I think that the spirit of it is that we stay on top of it. And so I think the board requires clarification on the idea that we can take things out, and also from us, what do we mean by extending? When are we going to redo the plan? It'd be my recommendation that we do it sooner rather than later. And if you look at when the strategic plan was done, I think it was started at the end of 2017, and then that went into 2018. So I would just make that comment and that recommendation, and then offer any thoughts you had.
No, I don't disagree. I think, when we say we are responsible for the plan and we're updating the plan, I think we have gone through a process that strategically makes and requires us to specifically look at the plan. And you're partially correct, Supervisor Dickinson, that the plan hasn't been looked at. I think it has been looked at by staff. It has been monitored by staff. It has been clearly monitored by administration. It has been the lead. It has assisted the departments in their work. But to the same token, I think it is incumbent upon us as leadership of the board to take ownership to that. And then, but I think what we are really saying is, because we got sidetracked because of COVID, and I'm not using that as an excuse, I'm saying that we need to, and that's why we have put specifically on the onus of each of the committees to look at updating those strategies, those objectives, and potentially outcomes. To the other side of that is providing, feedback and updates, for measurements. It does take specifically does take a significant amount of resources from departments to monitor those outputs, and to act, in some cases, some of the information that we utilize to generate the statistics is not generated for possibly 2 years. A prime example of that would be the life report. The life report is generated every 2 years, and some of the information from the life report provides data on outcome measures that are used in the strategic plan. So all great comment. Any other information on the update on the progress on the strategic plan? Okay, we will move on to operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution. Item 5A, a consideration of whether Marathon County should securitize payments in connection with the distributor settlement on the opioid litigation. And I'll give a little bit of background. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2018, possibly, when the county authorized, we authorized the county to participate in litigation over the impacts that opioids have had on our, on the operations of the county. We are part of one of 71 counties in the state of Wisconsin. Not all counties, 71 participated, not one county chose not to. And then there's also several municipalities. I think there's 6 or 7 municipalities that are participating in litigation over the impacts that opioids have had on operations, on the citizens, and over potentially, in the litigation, accusing certain entities of unethical approaches as far as how they were doing business. There's 3 parts to that litigation. There is the distributors, there's the manufacturers, and then there is the, what was the other one, distributors?
Retailers.
Retailers. And so we are, we're in settlement now, settlement for one portion of that. And under that settlement and in your packet, you'll see some links to what is available that will potentially come to the county. So one of those settlements, or one portion, 1/3 of those settlements is actually being materialized now and coming to fruition. And we will start to see dollars either by the 4th quarter, maybe the 1st quarter of 2023. Under the proposed settlement, the payments will come in some cases from one of the settlees over an 8-year period, and 3 of the other settlees will come to this county over an 18-year period. Those 3 entities, the question, and so WCA led a discussion about whether or not, similar to the tobacco settlement when the state received the tobacco settlement money. In this case, let's step back a little bit. So before we got to the point of the settlement, the state of Wisconsin, WCA, entered into some discussions about how is that settlement going to come to the entities that are suing. If you think back to the tobacco settlement, the vast majority of that settlement money went directly to the state, and the state chose how to utilize and disseminate most of those funds, and they chose whether or not to securitize that money, meaning getting the money all up front. The WCA worked hard to the credit of the legislature, saw fit that the vast majority of those funds that are potentially going to be recognized, in this case, 70% of those funds are going to come directly to the municipalities. They're going to come directly to the 71 counties. They're going to also come directly, 70% of that settlement is going to come directly to those municipalities that participated. And the state of Wisconsin is going to receive 30%. So now the question is coming in Marathon County, if it chooses to, can receive those funds. Again, Johnson & Johnson's settlement will be over an 8-year period, and their portion of the settlement is a number. And the other 3 participants will settle their and pay out their settlement over an 18-year period. So the Wisconsin counties decided to have a discussion about, is the dollar in hand up front more valuable to counties today than waiting and potentially running the risk of not getting those settlement funds up to 18 years from now? And so you have in your packet links to what that really means. And what that means is, if we were to choose to opt to securitize those funds, I get into a whole host of legalities about what happens. Effectively, we issue bonds that are going to take, and we receive the proceeds of those bonds. Those bonds are, the payments on those bonds are guaranteed by the payments that are coming from the litigants in this case. And so they are going to guarantee to pay the bonds off, and the county is not responsible in any way of paying those bonds off. But when we do that, we're going to receive obviously less than a full face dollar of the settlement. So they went into some very calculated, some estimates as far as calculation. And one of the estimates is trying to determine what is the present dollar value of a dollar versus that dollar 18 years from now. And so you have to make some assumptions. You have to make some assumptions on what's the bond going to issue at? What is the discount that the bond purchasers are going to charge to take on the risk that the counties were getting or were having about receiving those funds 18 years from now? And then you have to also determine what's that dollar worth today in comparison to what's that dollar worth 18 years from now, meaning a dollar 18 years from now probably is not going to buy a dollar's worth of today's product. And so it gets into what's deemed what's called a present day value of that dollar. Under their calculation and their presentation, if we were to potentially securitize, and based on the estimates that were in the calculations and in their formulas, the county would potentially receive 90 or 89% present day value of a dollar. Now that's their calculations. So the question becomes, are we even interested in participating in a potential securitization versus saying, absolutely not, we'll take our chances with whether or not company XYZ is going to be in business to pay out those required settlement funds 18 years from now. So the WCA is looking for an indication of how many people. They're not looking for a commitment today, other than, yes, we're interested in exploring that, but they do want some feedback by July 22nd as to whether or not the county is interested, or absolutely no, we're not interested. And so with that, I would open it up for discussion and questions. Supervisor Boots.
That 89% is from, let's say, Johnson & Johnson. They're giving us that's what they think it's going to be worth.
No, Johnson & Johnson.
Who's bringing up the 89% number?
WCA and PFM have done a calculation as to.
That's what I want. That's it.
Okay. Now, Johnson & Johnson is not, just to understand clearly, the Johnson & Johnson portion of the settlement is not even being securitized. We will get 100% of Johnson & Johnson's payments out of over 8 years, as long as Johnson & Johnson is in business 8 years from now. Okay, so that portion of the settlement is not part of the securitization. The portion that's the securitization is the other three companies, and the other three companies are McKesson. Mike, help me. What the other three companies? Other two companies between McKesson, Bergen. Anyway, there's two other companies, and looking at their bond rating did improve a little bit when the settlement was reached, but their bond rating on the two companies stayed at BBB, so they're not even rated as high as Marathon County, and then one company is A minus BB rated on the exchange. Supervisor Robinson, please.
The companies are Cardinal, McKesson, and American Source Bergen. Virgin. So I've been listening into the Counties Association, and while I don't have a problem with pursuing additional discussion of securitization, I'm not sold on us necessarily doing it. I think that, you know, the question is where is the risk, who is the risk, and what do we give up by securitizing it? If we're confident in the ability of those three companies to exist throughout that 18-year period, and it's front-end loaded, you know, it's not necessarily always even payments over that period of time. You know, who's going to bear the risk? And I think we ought to do our due diligence and just explore our options, but I think there's a little bit of skepticism about whether securitization is in the county's best interest.
I don't disagree. I mean, the fact is we're probably looking at a little bit less on the three companies portions of the settlement, a little bit less than 50% of full value, but that's not present day value on those three companies. The other thing that I would say that was brought up in one of the discussions that I've had with other counties is this, you know, if we go back 18 years ago, we didn't see opioid being the major issue and crisis and the issues that are associated with opioids. That challenge has shown up more recently, probably in the last 8 to 10 years. So one of the questions is, and understand that the opioid settlement money has restrictions, so our hands are tied as to how that can be utilized, and it has to be used for mitigation of opioid effects and impacts. So one of the questions that was raised in one of the discussions I was having was, is 18 years from now opioids going to be the same crisis issue that we're facing, and how does the restrictions that the manufacturers have put on the use of those funds, does that tie our hands? It effectively still ties our hands 18 years from now, but is there need for programming and abatement of opioid impacts 18 years from now? I don't know the answer to that question. My crystal ball is a little bit fuzzy for looking 18 years down the road, but I throw that out as also a discussion point. And the other thing that was brought up is, do the other of these 18 companies, or the other three companies, because they are clearly not AAA companies as Johnson & Johnson is there risk that they potentially have legislation that mitigates them making those payments sometime in the future? I don't have the answer either. I just bring it up for discussion. So I like Supervisor Robinson, think that we should at least leave our options open and not close the door to securitization, because we're not asking to be committed to securitization. Because I think the other question that was asked, that I've asked WCDA to clarify, is if only 25% of the counties participate, there's still going to be a fixed cost to go down this. And how much does that impact the settlement, or the potential settlement that the county would receive, versus, as they've done calculated now, all 71 securitizing it? So I think those are questions we don't have answers to yet. Throw it out to the rest of the committee for discussion. Thoughts? Supervisor Dickinson.
Is there any time frame on when that money would have to be used for the
No, there's not a requirement as far as when it has to be used. It must be put into a segregated account, and it must be used for what is already been defined as permissible uses by the courts. So the courts has spelled out, I think it is a 3-page single-space line options, or options that those funds can be used for, but it has to go into any of those funds that come in to this county have to go into that segregated account. We have to even set that segregated account up prior to effectively receiving those dollars. Once we receive those dollars, they go into that segregated account, and there is going to be an accounting for what those dollars are used for at some point. That process also hasn't fully been described yet.
Is that an interest-bearing account?
It can be, yes, absolutely. And the interest does not retain the character of the original dollars. So from what I've gathered is the interest then is free to be used for anything else, anything that is chosen. Supervisor Robinson.
I think one of the components of our evaluation of whether to do securitization would be developing a plan and how we might use those dollars and when the needs are for those resources to be allocated. And I would hope that we would move down that path of both evaluating the financial and the programmatic needs associated with it, and not wait until the end of that process to really develop that plan.
Supervisor Van Cray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we did go to the route where we'd be receiving payments 18 years down the road, and let's say there is no opioid issues 18 years down the road, can we appeal to the courts to use that for a different use? Or does the money get returned? I mean, in a perfect world and there's no opioid issue in 18 years, what happens to the money if we can't use it?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know that you can, I suppose you can always petition the court for a different use, whether or not that's successful or not, from a decision that was made 17 years ago, or 16 or 15 or 14, whatever the time period is, I'm not sure. And I would look to Corp Counsel if he's got any words of wisdom.
I don't really have any more insight than saying I don't have an answer to that question. Typically, settlements are between the parties in the litigation, so petitioning a court later on to change the terms of the settlement typically isn't something that you would see be successful, but I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Supervisor Van Cray.
So who is monitoring that we're using this money correctly, and what would be the penalty if we didn't?
That's also yet to be determined. So is there any objection to at least indicating to WCA, I guess I'll go with that direction. Is there any objection to indicating to WCA that we at least have interest at exploring, at least exploring the future possibility of securitizing? It is not committing the county. It's just looking at what those results would be and what additional options would come from that. Any objection to doing that from the executive committee? Okay. We will move on to, let's see, the next item. Before we go to item B, a motion to go into closed session, I had a request from a supervisor on this committee to do a audio recording of the closed session. Per our rules, I am to rule on whether or not I will allow or require an audio recording of the closed session. And before I give the answer, I want to give the history of that rule in our rules and why it even exists. First off, we have a situation where in some cases we get into closed session for litigation or potential litigation scenarios and discussion about litigation. And so there is potential in that scenario where I can see an audio recording of a closed session is in fact needed. In this case, when it was the administrator, and I'll throw it to the administrator as to why he requested a potential, the option of a closed session. But the reason, when you do evaluations or mid-year evaluations, which clearly is a check-in, it is not something that initially will become a permanent record of the administrator's employment record. I'm going to rule that a audio recording of the closed session will potentially inhibit free and open discussion by this body about the administrator's performance. So I am going to rule against having an audio recording of that potential closed session. Now, that is appealable to this body, to the executive committee, and the executive committee can overrule me and require a closed session recording if we choose to go into closed session. And I'm not saying we even have to go into closed session, but if we choose to go into closed session, and if this body were to choose, they can choose to overrule my decision to have an audio recording of the closed session. So I wanted to throw that out there before we even entertain the discussion about going into closed session. So my ruling is that I am not going to allow an audio recording. I think it may inhibit the discussion. I think there's clearly challenges with maintaining the security of that closed session recording. That recording, if made, is required to be maintained by the clerk and is shareable to any one individual. I think it creates challenges. And again, going back to the intent of the law, or the board rule, it was to provide for the protection of, and if we are going to get into litigation. This is an administrator's mid-year check-in. I don't believe that a audio recording is needed for that. So with that, Supervisor Langenhan.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, sub 1, sub C, for the purpose of considering performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercise responsibility, to wit, feedback on the work of the county administrator.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Mask. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would just make one comment about what you had said. Security, I could understand where you're saying that, it's a mid-year review or something, which isn't really necessarily indicated on here. It just talks about feedback. It doesn't say a mid-year review. So I understand what you're saying in that regard, and maybe it's not necessary or what the history is. I don't really see it as a security issue. I think any recording that we would have in any instance would fall under that same thing. If you have litigation, well, there would be a security issue with that. It kind of goes against the flavor of that. And there isn't an intent, it's in our rules. I don't really see where you're reading any intent on it. I appreciate, your review on that, and that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we call the roll, I would ask the administrator to at least provide because it was at his request that I put the option to go into closed session, and so I would offer the administrator his opinion as to why he requested the option to go into closed session.
If it pleases the group, the reason I asked that is we just had the annual work plan update, and for a number of people on the committee, this is the first time that, or certainly the board is the first time they're going to be involved in the appraisal for the term. One of the three things in my appraisal is the annual work plan. There is contribution to culture and adherence to core values. Quite honestly, this is just an opportunity that I take with all my staff, is the mid-year check-in. And I recognize that the group that approved the work plan is not the same group that is all on this committee and certainly the full board. So just the opportunity to get some feedback from this committee on the approach to the work plan, and what's working well from the perspective of the committee in terms of how I'm engaging with you and engaging with the full board, and what are some areas that you think are opportunities for improvement. So that was the intent.
Okay, with that, I have a motion to go into closed session. Motion and seconded. Any further debate? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I would ask the clerk to call the roll, and we'll have a roll call vote.
Gibbs.
Aye.
McEwen.
Aye.
Boots. Van Cray. Robinson. No. Seafelt. Longenhan. Dickinson. No. Mask.
And the motion is carried, and we will now proceed into closed session under closed session rules. Any member of the parent body is allowed to stay in.